Tonight, breaking news as we come on the air. President Biden just moments away from a high-stakes news conference, unscripted, live, taking questions with the world watching. President Biden, the NATO summit in Washington, and one more critical test to save his campaign. His first solo news conference in 8 months, and we'll carry it live. And the new ABC News Washington Post poll tonight, what it shows in this race between President Biden and Donald Trump. It is a tied race, even with the debate. And the poll asking about a hypothetical matchup between Vice President Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, and what would happen if she was at the top of the ticket, what the poll reveals. Also tonight, the extreme heat. 65 million Americans under heat alerts right now, the staggering heat moving into the east again. And in Texas tonight, more than 1 million customers without power, now days after the hurricane came barreling in. They are in sweltering temperatures. Lee Goldberg standing by with the forecast and the heat now moving into the east. Tonight, the urgent manhunt for a person of interest wanted in the killing of a young sheriff's deputy killed in an ambush. The news tonight coming out of the Alec Baldwin trial, the defense taking aim at a crime scene technician, asking about the lack of surveillance video. Good news on the economy tonight. Inflation now slowing to 3% in June. Will there be a rate cut coming? Tonight, the intense search for a missing 14-year-old girl from Utah, vanishing while visiting her grandmother. Near New York City tonight, shark sightings forcing parts of a popular beach to close. And the tributes tonight to actress Shelley Duvall, her unforgettable roles and the one performance still giving audiences the chills.
From ABC News World Headquarters in New York, this is World News Tonight with David Muir.
Good evening, and we begin tonight with the breaking news. President Biden is about to face yet another critical test, a rare solo and unscripted news conference taking questions from reporters amid growing doubts from some members of his own party over whether he should continue his run for president. The president's clarity and stamina amid a grueling week hosting the NATO summit in Washington will all be under the microscope. It comes at the end of a 3-day summit, President Biden taking a victory lap of sorts with world leaders, members of NATO, the president helping to unite and grow America's most important military alliance. But tonight, even as leading Democrats give the president credit for his accomplishments, including his work with NATO and Ukraine, the question's growing. And this evening here, the new ABC News Washington Post poll, Biden versus Trump. It remains a virtual tie after the debate. Trump 47, Biden 46. The same poll asking about a matchup between Vice President Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. She leads in the new ABC News poll, 49 to Trump's 46. Mary Bruce leading us off.
It's been 8 months since President Biden stood on a stage alone and faced reporters. Tonight's news conference, a critical test. His campaign well aware every word will be scrutinized. He has to show the American people he has what it takes in live, unscripted moments to beat Donald Trump and serve another 4 years. Or else the steady stream of Democratic defections could become a flood. Just moments ago, the president misspeaking in a NATO event, introducing Ukrainian President Zelensky as Russia's Vladimir Putin, before quickly correcting himself.
Ladies and gentlemen, President Putin. President Putin. We're going to beat President Putin. President Zelensky. I'm so focused on beating Putin, we got to worry about it. Anyway, Mr. President,
I'm better.
You are a hell of a lot better.
It comes as our new ABC News Ipsos poll shows 85% of Americans think he's too old for a second term. Biden has defiantly insisted he's not going anywhere.
I am running and going to win again.
And our national poll shows even after that disastrous debate, the president remains locked in a dead heat with Trump, 46 to 47. But as pressure grows on Biden to drop out, tonight ABC News has confirmed that his campaign has started to privately survey voters to see how Vice President Kamala Harris would do if she were the one to take on Trump. With Biden under fire, Harris has been his relentless defender on the campaign trail, today appearing in battleground North Carolina.
Thanks to Joe Biden, if there is one single person who deserves credit in the world for strengthening NATO, making it stronger, making it more united and more effective, that is Joe Biden. That is Joe Biden.
And our new poll shows that in a head-to-head matchup with Trump, Harris actually fares slightly better than Biden, beating him 49 to 46, still within the margin of error. It all comes just 24 hours after actor and Democratic mega donor George Clooney implored Biden to get out of the race, calling the president a hero. And after former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi signaling the president can still decide to drop out of the race, but urging him to make that decision soon.
It's up to the president to decide if he is going to run. We're all encouraging him to make that decision because time is running short.
People heard the former speaker say that and then asked, well, didn't the president say he is running for president? She indicates that the decision is still yet to be made. A lot in flux here. Mary Bruce with live from Washington again tonight. She's adjacent, actually, to where this news conference is about to play out. President Biden, as you point out, Mary, this is going to be a solo news conference, unscripted, live, the country watching and the world watching because this is the NATO summit. So, Mary, a long political career for President Biden, and yet tonight, another critical test.
David, the president will be under an intense microscope here tonight. His goal and his hope is that he can show voters that he can handle the heat of the press and has the stamina for another 4 years. But any signs of struggle or a bad performance, and we could see the floodgates open and even more defections from the Hill. David.
Mary Bruce with us live tonight. Mary, thank you. One more note on this tonight. More than a dozen Democrats on the Hill are now publicly calling for President Biden to step aside. And today, officials from President Biden's campaign going to the Hill to meet with Senate Democrats. The meeting described at times as tense. So was it enough to convince them? What they told our Rachel Scott right after.
Today, behind closed doors, Senate Democrats listened for more than 2 hours as top Biden campaign officials made their case for why the president could still win in November and should stay in the race.
What's on everybody's mind, is there a clear path to victory here? And can we honestly say that we're on a path to defeating Donald Trump and holding on to the Senate and holding on to the House of Representatives?
One senator describing the meeting as tense at times. We're told a number of lawmakers complained to the Biden team that they were being put in difficult, impossible, and untenable positions, having to defend the president's disastrous debate performance to their constituents back home. One senator telling ABC News, "I needed to see hard data that showed a path to success in November, and we did not get that."
Senator Whitehouse,
2 hours later, the meeting breaking up, the president's aides leaving, senators filtering out.
Some of my concerns are allayed. Some others have been deepened.
I spoke with Senator Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island as he was heading into the meeting.
Do you believe that President Biden is the best person to defeat Donald Trump in November?
I am going to hold off until we've had this conversation where they will discuss that exact point.
This was Senator Whitehouse after the meeting broke up.
How would you describe the meeting?
Cordial and constructive.
Constructive, okay, but not necessarily enough so far.
I'm not going to characterize it that way.
Peter Welch of Vermont is the only senator to openly call for the president to drop out. Writing in the Washington Post, "We have asked President Biden to do so much for so many for so long. It has required unmatched selflessness and courage. We need him to put us first, as he has done before." I asked him if today's meeting changed his mind.
I have not changed my mind, but I really appreciate the White House folks coming over.
West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin hinting the situation will come to a head this weekend.
I think everyone will be talking over Friday, Saturday, and by Sunday you should have some idea of what's going on.
By Sunday, we should have some idea what's going on. Senator Manchin telling you today, Rachel. Rachel back up on the Hill tonight. I'm curious, with Senator Manchin noting Sunday that we should have some idea of what's going on, people at home are going to wonder if Sunday is a day that folks in Washington there are talking about in political circles, or is it merely a signal that this is coming to a head and soon? And we should also note bigger picture here, Rachel. This is all playing out as the Republican National Convention is set to start on Monday.
That's exactly right, David. There is a growing sense here on Capitol Hill that the president is running out of time to turn his campaign around and that the Democratic Party could be reaching a breaking point. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries plans to meet with Democratic leadership in the next few days to discuss the path forward. Members of Congress have now left Washington for the week, but more and more Democrats have told us they need to be convinced by the president himself, not his advisors, that he has what it takes to win in November, David.
Rachel Scott, Mary Bruce, both live in Washington and standing by when the president comes on the air for this news conference live. We'll go to our whole team and we'll carry the president, of course, live right here. In the meantime, we do move on to the other major news this Thursday night, the storms and the dangerous heat wave moving east. 65 million Americans already on alert. Lee Goldberg on the heat coming to the east. And tonight, look at this in Texas. More than 1 million customers still without power in the searing heat there. Now, days after the hurricane. Tonight, hospitals struggling to keep up. Faith Abube from Texas.
Tonight, nearly 4 full days since Hurricane Beryl made landfall, frustration and misery setting in across southeast Texas.
You would have thought that by now they would have had a better plan than what is happening now.
Susie Cisneros and her husband Tony have already lost all the food in their refrigerator. Their only reprieve is when they go to the hospital for Susie's treatments for breast cancer.
I kind of just hang out there at the hospital just to cool off a little bit.
Beryl knocked out power to nearly 3 million customers. Houston's main utility company, CenterPoint, admitting they should have done more to improve their infrastructure ahead of the storm. Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick speaking for Governor Greg Abbott, who's currently on an economic trade mission in Asia, calling for an investigation into CenterPoint.
If CenterPoint meets their goals by Sunday, they will have reduced it from about 2.2 million people without power down to still about 500,000 for next week. Folks, that is not acceptable.
And David, the power outages here in Texas are straining hospital resources. So many patients unable to be discharged because their homes are just too hot. And now this arena behind me being used as a transitional facility until those patients can go home. David.
Extraordinarily difficult several days there in Texas. Faith Abube, Faith, thank you. Let's get to meteorologist Lee Goldberg from our New York station WABC tracking this heat now. Lee?
David, that searing heat definitely has some staying power. We're going on the second week of record-breaking heat in the Southwest. I mean, Las Vegas has topped 115 for almost a week now, and that heat is only expanding eastward into the Rockies and Plains. Now, the remnants of Beryl brought a tropical timeout, if you will, to the northeast from the heat, but it's building right back in by the end of the weekend, all the way into midweek next week. Triple-digit feel-like readings all the way from the mid-Atlantic and Carolinas to the northeast. But before that happens, low pressure's been off the southeast coast of the U.S. It infuses a front with lots of tropical moisture. We're going to have flash flooding all the way from the Carolinas to the northern mid-Atlantic, up to 5 inches of rainfall. Don't drive through standing water. We'll keep you posted. David?
Lee Goldberg of Channel 7 right here in New York. Lee, always good to have you. We turn next tonight to the urgent manhunt in Houston for a person of interest wanted in the killing of a young sheriff's deputy. Authorities say it was an ambush. The deputy had been working overtime trying to help out in the aftermath of the hurricane. Here's Pierre Thomas.
Tonight, a desperate manhunt underway for the suspect who shot and killed a Harris County Sheriff's deputy in Houston, Texas.
The loss of a hero, a loss of a deputy, is just heartbreaking.
44-year-old Ronnie Palmer is considered armed and dangerous, identified as a person of interest in the shooting of Deputy Fernando Escueda. His family hoping he would survive.
I just got the call. My brother said he got shot. He may not make it, but he was gone already.
Escueda was only 28 years old and had been working on the Violent Defenders Task Force. Authorities say it all started at 10 p.m. last night at Little Caesars Pizza restaurant. Authorities believe Palmer became upset with an employee when his pizza order was wrong.
It's my understanding that he pistol whipped the employee.
Deputy Escueda responded to reports of the assault and used a description of the license plate to track the getaway car to a nearby residence. Police suspect he was ambushed by gunfire.
David, the manhunt is taking place as the Houston area tries to battle back from Hurricane Beryl. Tonight, they're calling in 100 officers from other two departments to try to help with law enforcement in the region. David?
Our Chief Justice correspondent, Pierre Thomas, in Washington. Thanks, Pierre. Now to the news tonight in the Alec Baldwin trial, the defense taking aim at the police investigation into the deadly shooting on the set of that movie Rust. Baldwin's lawyers pressing a crime scene technician asking about the lack of surveillance video taken from the warehouse that supplied some dummy ammunition for the film, but also stored live rounds at the same time. The defense accusing authorities of rushing their investigation, prosecutors saying the warehouse owner had nothing to do with the live rounds getting onto that set. We turn now to the economy tonight and some welcome news this evening. The new inflation report beating expectations. Consumer prices in June were 3% higher compared to a year ago. That's edging closer now to the Federal Reserve's 2% target. Overall, prices actually fell month to month for the first time since the pandemic. Let's get right to our chief economics correspondent, Rebecca Jarvis, here with more tonight. Rebecca?
David, this report significantly improves the possibility of a rate cut this fall. We've come a long way from that peak 9.1% inflation, with prices between May and June even falling for the first time since the COVID pandemic 4 years ago. And it's been driven in large part by decreases in the cost of gasoline, car prices are also lower. Meantime, prices on other household staples like groceries have stabilized over the last year, though they are up about 25% since 2019. And while housing inflation continues to remain stubbornly high, economists do see signs it is starting to cool. They see today's report as a signal the Fed will cut interest rates come September. David?
People have waited a long time for that. Rebecca, thank you. When we come back here, the intense search for a missing 14-year-old girl from Utah, vanishing while visiting her grandmother, what we've learned. And in New York City tonight, multiple shark sightings closing parts of a popular beach. In a moment here.
At Fisher Investments, we may look like other money managers, but we're different.
You can't be that different.
We are. We have a team of specialists not only in investing, but also in financial and estate planning and more.
Your clients rely on you for all that?
Yes, and as a fiduciary, we always put their interests first.
But you still sell commission-based products, right?
No, we have a simple management fee structured so we do better when our clients do better.
Huh, we're more different than I thought.
At Fisher Investments, we're clearly different.
At Simply Safe, your safety is the only thing that matters. We designed smarter ways to detect motion for fast emergency response. We create HD cameras so you can see what's happening in your home from anywhere. All powered by Fast Protect technology. Exclusively from Simply Safe for faster police response. Get Simply Safe today with 1 free month of Fast Protect monitoring, our most advanced way to protect your home. There's no safe like Simply Safe.
Your skin is ever-changing. Take care of it with Gold Bond's healing formulations of 7 moisturizers and 3 vitamins. For all your skins, Gold Bond.
Beneful knows a full life doesn't just happen. It's a choice. To take a swing, to taste all life has to offer. Choose joy. Choose Beneful. And try Incredibites, just for small dogs.
For people who feel limited by the unpredictability of generalized myasthenia gravis and who are anti-AChR antibody positive, season to season, Ultomiris is continuous symptom control with improvement in activities of daily living. It is reduced muscle weakness. And Ultomiris is the only long-acting GMG treatment with the freedom of just 6 to 7 infusions per year for a predictable routine I can count on.
Ultomiris can lower your immune system's ability to fight infections, increasing your chance of serious meningococcal infections, which may become life-threatening or fatal, and other types of infections. Complete or update your meningococcal vaccines at least 2 weeks before starting Ultomiris. If Ultomiris is urgent, you should also receive antibiotics with your vaccines. Before starting Ultomiris, tell your doctor about all of your medical conditions and medications. Ultomiris can cause reactions such as back pain, tiredness, dizziness, limb discomfort, or bad taste. Ultomiris is moving forward with continuous symptom control. Ask your neurologist about starting Ultomiris.
Tonight, the desperate search for a missing 14-year-old girl from Ogden, Utah, vanishing while visiting her grandmother in Mexico City. Her family says Elizabeth Gonzalez was last seen going to a store nearly 2 weeks ago now. Authorities believe she was, quote, coerced into getting into a taxi with an unknown adult. The FBI is now working with Mexican authorities trying to find her. Tonight, an American grandmother has returned home after pleading guilty to bringing ammunition into Turks and Caicos. Sharita Greer received a $1,500 fine and a 23-week suspended sentence. She was arrested in May, saying she had no idea 2 bullets were in the bottom of her duffel bag. She was the last of 5 Americans who, for a time, faced up to 12 years in prison for violating Turks and Caicos' strict gun laws in recent months. When we come back here tonight near New York City, multiple shark sightings closing parts of a popular beach. And tonight here, we remember a well-known actress, one of her roles particularly chilling.
So what are you thinking?
I'm thinking about our honeymoon. What about Africa? Safari. Hot air balloon ride. Swim with elephants. Wait, can we afford a safari?
Great question. Like everything, takes a little planning.
Or put the money towards a down payment.
On a ranch?
In Montana.
With horses.
Let's take a look at those scenarios.
JP Morgan Wealth Management has advisors in Chase branches and tools like Wealth Plan to help keep you on track. When you're planning for it all, the answer is JP Morgan Wealth Management.
It's so easy to get your windshield replaced using SafeLight. Tell the people why you haven't done it already, my man. It started off as a chip and grew into a crack, and it just keeps going. So what do we do now? I went ahead and scheduled an appointment online at safelight.com. Told them to meet us here at the beach.
Let's get started.
SafeLight repair.
Safe Light Replace.
Schedule free mobile service at safelight.com.
Safe Light Repair, Safe Light Replace.
Can Nariva support your brain health?
Mary, Janet, hey.
Eddie, no. Fraser, Frank. Frank?
Fred, how are you? Fred.
Support up to 7 brain health indicators, including memory. Search Nariva on Amazon for the best deals of the summer.
Years ago, I prayed this prayer, and it changed my life, and it can change your life. You see, I was just sick and tired of being sick and tired, and my life was in a mess. And I just got on my knees one night, and I said, God, I've sinned against you. I'm sorry. Forgive me. And I said, I believe Jesus Christ is your son, and I believe that he took my sins to the cross, and he died and shed his blood for my sins, and that he was buried, and that you raised him to life, and I'd like to invite him to come into my heart right now. And I prayed that prayer, and God heard my prayer, and he forgave me, and he'll forgive you, and he'll cleanse you and change your life starting today. Just pray this prayer as I say, God, I'm a sinner, I'm sorry, forgive me. I believe Jesus is your son. I want to trust him as my Savior and follow him as my Lord from this day forward. Amen. If you prayed that prayer, I want you to call right now that number that's on the screen. Call that number, and may God bless you.
The best things in life, they come in twos. 2 scoops of ice cream, 2 thumbs up. And now, buy any phone when you switch to Consumer Cellular and get 2 months of service free. That's right, 2 months free. All with the same fast, reliable, nationwide coverage as Big Wireless. Make the switch today. Call, go online, or visit a store near you. That's 2 times the savings and our best deal of the year.
To the index, in tonight's shark sightings have forced a popular beach to close here in New York City. Parts of Rockaway Beach closed in Queens. Police drones spotting sharks in the water there. In fact, 3 separate sightings. Authorities say the drones will continue watching for any more possible sharks in that area. When we come back here tonight, the tributes pouring in for actress Shelley Duvall. The famous role still giving audiences the chills tonight.
Over 13 million Americans were affected by identity theft in 2022, and the threats are more than you realize. If you're a victim of identity theft, LifeLock works to fix it on your behalf, backed by the $1 Million Protection Package. Enroll now.
Ready? Distinguished guests, the President of the United States. Distinguished guests. Distinguished guests, the President. Distinguished.
Just one. Can I, for just 1 second, can I record a view?
Thank you. Distinct.
Critical test to save his campaign. His first solo news conference in 8 months, and we'll carry it live. And the new ABC News Washington Post poll tonight, what it shows in this race between President Biden and Donald Trump. It is a tied race, even with the debate. And the poll asking about a hypothetical matchup between Vice President Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. And what would happen if she was at the top of the ticket, what the poll reveals. Also tonight, the extreme heat. 65 million Americans under heat alerts right now, the staggering heat moving into the east again. And in Texas tonight, more than 1 million customers without power now days after the hurricane came barreling in. They are in sweltering temperatures. Lee Goldberg standing by with the forecast and the heat now moving into the east. Tonight, the urgent manhunt for a person of interest wanted in the killing of a young sheriff's deputy killed in an ambush. The news tonight coming out of the Alec Baldwin trial, the defense taking aim at a crime scene technician, asking about the lack of surveillance video. Good news on the economy tonight. Inflation now slowing to 3% in June. Will there be a rate cut coming? Tonight, the intense search for a missing 14-year-old girl from Utah, vanishing while visiting her grandmother. Near New York City tonight, shark sightings forcing parts of a popular beach to close. And the tributes tonight to actress Shelley Duvall, her unforgettable roles and the one performance still giving audiences the chills.
From ABC News World Headquarters in New York, this is World News Tonight with David Muir.
Good evening, and we begin tonight with the breaking news. President Biden is about to face yet another critical test, a rare solo and unscripted news conference taking questions from reporters amid growing doubts from some members of his own party over whether he should continue his run for president. The president's clarity and stamina amid a grueling week hosting the NATO summit in Washington will all be under the microscope. It comes at the end of a 3-day summit, President Biden taking a victory lap of sorts with world leaders, members of NATO, the president helping to unite and grow America's most important military alliance. But tonight, even as leading Democrats give the president credit for his accomplishments, including his work with NATO and Ukraine, the question's growing. And this evening here, the new ABC News Washington Post poll, Biden versus Trump. It remains a virtual tie after the debate. Trump 47, Biden 46. The same poll asking about a matchup between Vice President Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. She leads in the new ABC News poll, 49 to Trump's 46. Mary Bruce leading us off.
It's been 8 months since President Biden stood on a stage alone and faced reporters. Tonight's news conference, a critical test. His campaign well aware every word will be scrutinized. He has to show the American people he has what it takes in live, unscripted moments to beat Donald Trump and serve another 4 years. Or else the steady stream of Democratic defections could become a flood. Just moments ago, the president misspeaking in a NATO event, introducing Ukrainian President Zelensky as Russia's Vladimir Putin, before quickly correcting himself.
Ladies and gentlemen, President Putin. President Putin. We're going to beat President Putin. President Zelensky. I'm so focused on beating Putin, we got to worry about it. Anyway.
distinguished guests, the President of the United States, Joe Biden.
Hey, buddy. Thank you. Please be seated. Well, good evening. We just concluded this year's NATO summit, and the consensus among the members was it was a great success. It was especially momentous because it represented the 75th year of the most important military defense alliance in the world's history of the world. We should never forget that NATO grew out of the wreckage of World War II, the most destructive war in history. The idea was to create an alliance of free and democratic nations that would commit themselves to a compact of collective defense. Standing together, they knew we'd all be safer. An attack on one would be treated as an attack on all. And it's worked because a would-be aggressor knows if they attack one of us, they'll be attacked by all of us. Sending that message is the best way to deter aggression and prevent wars in the first place. For those who thought NATO's time had passed, they got a rude awakening when Putin invaded Ukraine. Some of the oldest and deepest fears in Europe roared back to life because once again, a murderous madman was on the march. But this time, no one cowered in appeasement, especially the United States. We collected intelligence that Russia was planning to invade Ukraine months before the invasion. I directed the intelligence community to be a significant amount of intelligence to be declassified so I could start building an international coalition to oppose the invasion. Then in February, some of you remember, I warned the world that the invasion was imminent. I rallied a coalition of 50 nations from Europe to Asia to help Ukraine defend itself. Many foreign policy experts thought, as Putin amassed Russian forces just 100 miles north of Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine, but Putin thought it was the mother home of Russia. The capital would fall in less than a week. But the Ukrainian people, backed by a coalition to help build, stopped them. Today, Kyiv still stands, and NATO stands stronger than it has ever been. During the week of this summit, several heads of states made it a point in their statements to thank the United States and to thank me personally for all that NATO has achieved. NATO is not only stronger, NATO is bigger because we led the charge to bring in Finland and Sweden into the alliance, and it makes a gigantic difference. Excuse me. Meanwhile, my predecessor has made it clear he has no commitment to NATO. He's made it clear that he would feel no obligation to honor Article 5. He's already told Putin, and I quote, "Do whatever the hell you want." In fact, the day after Putin invaded Ukraine, here's what he said. It was genius. It was wonderful. Some of you forgot that, but that's exactly what he said. But I made it clear a strong NATO is essential to American security. And I believe the obligation of Article 5 is sacred. And I would remind all Americans, Article 5 is invoked only once in NATO's long history, and that was to defend America after 9/11. I made it clear that I will not bow down to Putin. I will not walk away from Ukraine. I will keep NATO strong. That's exactly what we did, and exactly what we'll continue to do. Now, the future of American policy is up to the American people. This is much more than the political question. It's more than that. It's a national security issue. Don't reduce this to the usual testament that people talk about, issues of being a political campaign. It's far too important. It's about the world we live in for decades to come. Every American must ask herself or himself, is the world safer with NATO? Are you safer? Is your family safer? I believe the American people know. The answer to all those questions is yes. And I believe the American people understand that America is stronger because of our alliances. I believe the American consensus from Truman to Reagan to me still holds today. America cannot retreat from the world. We must lead the world. We are an indispensable nation, as Madeleine Albright wrote. Now let me turn to three other key issues. Just this morning, we had a great economic report showing inflation is down. Overall prices fell last month. Core inflation is the lowest it's been in 3 years. Prices are falling for cars, appliances, and airfares. Grocery prices have fallen since the start of the year. We're going to keep working to take down corporate greed to bring those prices down further. Meanwhile, Trump's calling for a 10% tariff on everything Americans buy, including food from overseas, vegetables, and other necessities. And economists tell us that would cost the average American working family another $2,500 a year. It's a tax of $2,500 a year. Second, our efforts to secure the border, the southern border, is working. After Trump killed the bipartisan effort to secure the border, Republicans and Democrats had worked on, because he thought it would benefit me and make him a loser, Republicans walked away. So I took executive action last month. As a consequence, working with Mexico, border encounters have gone down over 50%. The current level is lower today than when Trump left office. Third, for months, the United States has been working to secure a ceasefire in Gaza, to bring the hostages home, to create a path for peace and stability in the Middle East. 6 weeks ago, I laid out a detailed plan in writing. It was endorsed by the UN Security Council, the G7. That framework is now agreed on by both Israel and Hamas. So I sent my team to the region to hammer out the details. These are difficult, complex issues. There's still gaps to close. We're making progress. The trend is positive, and I'm determined to get this deal done and bring an end to this war, which should end now. Let me conclude where I began. We're the United States of America. We are the indispensable nation. Our leadership matters. Our partnerships matter. This moment matters. We must rise to meet it. With that, I'll take your questions. I've been given a list of people to call on here. Reuters, Jeff Mason.
Mr. President, your political future has hung over the NATO summit a little bit this week. Speaker Pelosi made a point of suggesting that your decision on whether to stay in the race was still open. George Clooney and a handful of lawmakers have called on you to step aside. Reuters is reporting tonight that UAW leadership is concerned about your ability to win.
UAW just endorsed me, but go ahead.
Thank you. My question for you is, how are you incorporating these developments into your decision to stay? And separately, what concerns do you have about Vice President Harris's ability to beat Donald Trump if she were at the top of the ticket?
Look, I wouldn't have picked Vice President Trump to be vice president until I think she was not qualified to be president. So let's start there. Number one. The fact is that the consideration is that I think I'm the most qualified person to run for president. I beat him once, and I will beat him again. Secondly, the idea, I served in the Senate a long time. The idea that senators and congressmen running for office worry about the ticket is not unusual. And I might add, there are at least 5 presidents running or incumbent presidents who had lower numbers than I have now, later in the campaign. So there's a long way to go in this campaign. And so I'm just going to keep moving. And because, look, I got more work to do. We've got more work to finish. There's so much, we've made so much progress. Think about it. Think about where we are economically relative to the rest of the world. Name me a world leader who wouldn't want to trade places with our economy. We've created over 800,000 manufacturing jobs, 1.5 million jobs. So things are moving. We got more to go. Working class people still need help. Corporate greed is still at large. The corporate profits have doubled since the pandemic. They're coming down, and so I'm optimistic about where things are going. Danny Kemp, AFP.
Thanks. Thank you, Mr. President. I wanted to ask you about you mixed up Presidents Zelensky and Putin earlier today. And you now have sort of your key allies, including the British Prime Minister, the President of France, the German Chancellor having to step in and make excuses for you on that. Officials here are saying off the record that your decline has become noticeable. Hasn't this now, frankly, become damaging for America's standing in the world? Thank you.
Did you see any damage to our standing in my leading this conference? Have you seen a more successful conference? What do you think? And the Putin piece, I was talking about Putin, and I said, and now, at the very end, I said, Putin. I said, no, I'm sorry, Zelensky. And then I added 5 other names. Look, guys, the idea anybody suggests that we haven't had an incredibly successful conference. How many times did you hear in that conference, I know it sounds too self-serving, but other leaders, heads of state, in thanking me, saying the reason we're together is because of Biden, because Biden did the following. Look, folks, this is, well, anyway, I thought it was the most successful conference I've attended in a long time, and find me a world leader who didn't think it was. Next one, Nancy Cordes, CBS.
Thank you, Mr. President. You mentioned other instances in history where presidents have faced a challenge, but what makes this moment in history so unique is that it is not your enemies who are calling on you to reconsider your decision to stay in the race. It's your friends, supporters, people who think you've done a great job over the past 4 years. Have you spent time thinking about what it would mean for your legacy, which you've worked decades to build, if you stay in the race, despite the concerns that voters say they have, and you lose to someone who you yourself have argued is unfit to return to the Oval Office?
Well, look, I'm not in this for my legacy. I'm in this to complete the job I started. As you recall, understandably, many of you and many economists thought my initial initiatives that I put forward, can't do that, it's going to cause inflation, things are going to skyrocket, the debt's going to go up. What are you hearing now from mainstream economists? 16 economic Nobel laureates said I've done a hell of a job. That under my plans so far and what's going to happen in the future if I'm reelected, that things are going to get much better. Our economy is growing. I was determined when I got elected to stop the trickle-down economic theory, that if the wealthy did very well, everybody else would do well. My dad was a well-read, decent guy. I don't remember much trickling down on his kitchen table. Middle-class people and working-class people need help. And so what happened is I decided to was able to implement as president what I believed when I was a senator. And that is that the way to build this economy is from the middle out and the bottom up. That way we grow the economy. And the wealthy still do very well. They do fine. And guess what? Find me a mainstream economist who said we haven't done well. What have we not done that isn't working right now? And so we got more to do, though. We got to finish the job. And by the way, I come from the corporate state of the world. Delaware has more corporations registered in Delaware than every other state in the nation combined. I'm not anti-corporate, but corporate profits have doubled since the pandemic. Doubled. It's time things get back in order a little bit. It's time, for example, if I'm reelected, we're going to make sure that rents are kept at 5% increase, corporate rents for apartments and the like and homes are limited to 5%. We're going to make a lot of changes that I've been talking about because we're going to continue to grow this economy. And by the way, remember how I got so roundly criticized for being so pro-union, not labor, union. Well, guess what? I've been the most pro-union labor president in history. Not a joke. And guess what? We had the Treasury Department do a study. When unions do better, everybody does better. Everybody does better. And we talk about how, for example, remember when we talked about getting the computer chip industry back in the United States? Used to be 40% of the industry. We invented the chip. 40% of the industry was in the United States. And former presidents decided that the best way to do it is find the cheapest labor in the world, send the product over there, and import what the product was. And so what did I do? I was told not to go over to to Asia, including Europe, but Asia. And I remember going to South Korea, convincing them to invest $20 billion in the United States to build computer chip factories. And I asked why when they finally decided to do it. And the answer was because you have the safest economy in the world and you have the best workers in the world. So the whole idea here is we've invested, there's over $50 billion in investment in computer chip manufacturing just coming in the bean. None of you thought that would happen. None of you thought that would happen. But it's happening. It's happening. And it's going to grow economies. All through, and by the way, red states and blue states. Manufacturers as much in red states as in blue states. I've made no distinction. So my generic point is that the idea that we can't continue to build and grow the economy, make it fairer. And like I said, from my standpoint, when the middle class does well, that's when the whole economy grows. The poor have a shot, the wealthy do well. But the wealthy got to start paying their taxes.
As a follow-up, sir, you mentioned that your Vice President Kamala Harris would be ready to serve on day one. Can you elaborate on that? What is it about her attributes and her accomplishments over the last 4 years that make her ready to serve on day one if necessary?
First of all, the way she's handled the issue of freedom of women's bodies to have control over their bodies. Secondly, her ability to handle almost any issue on the board. This was a hell of a prosecutor. She was a first-rate person, and in the Senate she was really good. I wouldn't have picked her unless I thought she was qualified to be president. From the very beginning, I made no bones about that. She is qualified to be president. That's why I picked her. Felicia Schwartz, Financial Times.
Thank you, Mr. President. Presidency is the most straining job in the world, and it's 24/7. How can you say you'll be up for that next year, in 2 years, in 4 years, given the limits you've acknowledged that you have today?
The limits I've acknowledged I have?
There's been reporting that you've acknowledged that you need to go to bed earlier and your evening around 8.
That's not true. Look, what I said was, instead of my every day starting at 7 and going to bed at midnight, it'd be smarter for me to pace myself a little more. And I said, for example, the 8, 7, 6 stuff, instead of starting a fundraiser at 9 o'clock, start at 8 o'clock. People get to go home by 10 o'clock. That's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about, and if you look at my schedule since I made that stupid mistake in the campaign, in the debate, I mean, my schedule has been full bore. I've done, where's Trump been? Riding around in his golf cart, filling out his scorecard before he hits the ball? I mean, look, he's done virtually nothing. And I have, I don't know how many, don't hold me to it, roughly 20 major events. Some with thousands of people showing up. And so I just think it's better. I always have an inclination, whether I was playing sports or doing politics, just to keep going, not stop. I just got to just pace myself a little more. Pace myself. And the next debate, I'm not going to be traveling into 15 time zones a week before. Anyway, that's what it was about. That's what it was about. And by the way, even with that, I love my staff, but they add things all the time, at the very end. I'm catching hell from my wife for that. Anyway. I'm sorry, Zeke Miller, Associated Press.
Thank you, Mr. President. Two questions for you. First, on the NATO summit, President Zelensky, in your meeting with him, he pressed you to lift your limitations on the Ukrainian use of American weapons, saying that, in his public remarks afterwards, saying that Ukraine cannot win the war unless those limitations are lifted. Are you reconsidering your position on that? And then secondly, following up on Felicia's question there, leaders of your own party have said that they're not worried about that debate. They're worried about the next bad night and the bad night after that. How can you reassure the American people that you are up to the task and that there won't be more bad nights at a debate stage or somewhere else?
First thing about Zelensky asking for the ability to strike deep into Russia. We've allowed Zelensky to use American weapons in the near term, in the near or abroad, into Russia. Whether or not he should be attacked. For example, should Zelensky, he's not. If he had the capacity to strike Moscow, strike the Kremlin, would that make sense? It wouldn't. The question is, what's the best use of the weaponry he has, the weaponry we're getting to him? I've gotten a more long-range capacity, as well as defensive capacity. And so our military is where I'm following the advice of my commander-in-chief, the chief of staff of the military, as well as the Secretary of Defense and our intelligence people. And we're making a day-to-day basis on what they should and shouldn't go, how far they should go in. That's a logical thing to do. Second question related to
bad nights, sir. How can you reassure the American people that you won't have more bad nights, whether they be on a debate stage or it's a matter of foreign policy?
Well, I tell you what, the best way to assure them is the way I assure myself. And that is, am I getting the job done? Am I getting the job done? Can you name me somebody who's got more major piece of legislation passed in 3.5 years? I created 2,000 jobs this last week. So if I slow down, I can't get the job done. That's a sign that I shouldn't be doing it. But there's no indication of that yet. None. Who I got here? Merrick, Pulaski Radio.
Thank you, Mr. President. How are you?
I'm well.
The elections in the US have consequences around the world. You have pretty high standing in Europe. I just asked President Macron about you, and he said we are happy to have him as the President of the United States. But there is a concern. Many people in Poland and across Europe are worried that the former president may win the election. And there's a lot of concern that Donald Trump may weaken NATO, stop supporting Ukraine, or push Ukraine to give up territories to Russia.
They're correct.
And yourself was warning just 2 minutes ago about it. So my question is, do you think that Europe will be left on its own if Donald Trump wins the election? And what's your advice to European leaders to prepare for possible US disengagement?
Well, look, I think, how can I say this without sounding too self-serving? I'm not having any of my European allies come up to me and say, Joe, don't run. What I hear them say is, you've got to win. You can't let this guy come forward. It'd be a disaster. It'd be a disaster. I mean, I think he said in one of his rallies, don't hold me to this, recently, where NATO, I just learned about NATO, or something to that effect. Foreign policy has never been his strong point. And he seems to have an affinity to people who are authoritarian. That worries, as I tell you from Poland, that worries Europe. That worries Poland. And nobody, including Poland, think that if he wins in Ukraine, he's going to stop in Ukraine. That that's going to be the end of it. And so what I can say is, I think I'm the best qualified person to do the job, to make sure that Ukraine does not fall, that Ukraine succeeds, that the European alliance stays strong. You may recall, no one was talking about Finland joining NATO. I remember talking to Putin right after we got elected in Geneva, and he was talking about what we should do. We couldn't be in Eastern Europe, etc. And I said, you're looking for the Finlandization of Ukraine. I said, you're going to get the NATOization of Finland. And about 4 weeks later, I got a call. That's not true. Probably 5 months later, from the president of Finland, could he come and see me? In my office. I invited him to the Oval Office. We sat down and talked. He said he wanted to join NATO. Could I help? And I did. It wasn't automatic. And then I got a call from the Swedes. I beg your pardon? And so Finland joined NATO. 800-mile border is a significant, and they were already allies, but they weren't part of NATO. And you heard, I think you heard, maybe I can't recall whether he said it publicly in our closed meeting, but he wouldn't mind it being repeated. He said, we decided in Finland, the people of Finland decided they had to be part of NATO. It was in our interest because of the joint ability to be together, to dissuade any attack on Finland. And the same thing with Sweden. It took a lot of selling to some folks, particularly in Turkey and other places, to agree to the expansion. But it expanded. And we're a hell of a lot stronger because of it. We're more secure because of it. And by the way, I was able to get 50 other nations, 50, to support Ukraine. 50. And we were able to bring about a coalition of Europe and Asia, Japan and South Korea. I just we talked about AUKUS, and we talked about the relationship between Australia, New Zealand, Japan, South Korea, the United States. We're making the world safer and stronger because we have to deal with the new arrangement that exists in the world. The Cold War is over. The post-war era is over. What is going to replace it? And I respectfully suggest I have a pretty good idea what that should be. I've convinced a lot of people to follow it. And we're just going to get stronger. David Sanger. Where's it?
Thank you, Mr. President.
Be nice, David.
Mr. President, the NATO declaration that was issued yesterday was very notable because it described China as a decisive enabler of the war in Ukraine for its provision of critical goods to the Russians. That's part of a broader partnership that seems to have cemented in place in the past 2 or 3 years. I think one that you were a little bit doubtful of when we asked you about it some time ago. So I'd be interested to know whether you have a strategy now of trying to interrupt the partnership between China and Russia, and whether or not in a second term you would pursue that, if you could describe that strategy to us. And along the way, could you also tell us whether you think, just to follow up on Felicia's question, that if you were in a room with Vladimir Putin again, the way you were 3 years ago, or with President Xi, that a few years from now you will be able to go negotiate with them, handle them one-on-one?
Well, the first part of the question is, we discussed and I raised in the NATO summit, and others raised, the future of China's involvement, what they're going to do. What they're doing with Russia in terms of accommodating, facilitating they're getting access to additional. They're not supplying weapons themselves. They're supplying mechanisms for them to be able to get weapons. And China's position is basically, and I've spent more time with Xi Jinping than any world leader has, over 90 hours since being vice president all the way through, for real. And by the way, I handed all my notes. But my point is that Xi believes that China is a large enough market that they can entice any country, including European countries, to invest there in return for commitments from Europe to do A, B, C, or D, or not to do certain things. What's happened is we had a long discussion about what we cannot, we have to make clear China has to understand that if they are supplying Russia with information and capacity, along with working with North Korea and others to help Russia in armament, that they're not going to benefit economically as a consequence of that by getting the kind of investment they're looking for. And so, for example, we're in a situation where, and we've reestablished direct contact with China after that, remember the balloon, quote unquote, going down, and all of a sudden things came to an end? Well, we set up a new mechanism. There's a direct line between Xi and me, and our military has direct access to one another, and they contact one another when we have problems. The issue is that we have to make sure that Xi understands there's a price to pay for undercutting both the Pacific Basin as well as Europe, and as it relates to Russia and dealing with Ukraine. And so we, for example, if you want to invest in China, as you know this area really well. If you want to invest in China, you have to have a 51% Chinese owner. You have to make sure that you do by their rules. And you don't have the authority, and you have to provide all access to all the data and information you have. There was a while there, as you recall, the last administration and other administrations, where the access to that market was enticing enough to get companies to come in because they had access to over 1 billion people in a market, not 1 billion, but a lot of people in the market. And so they were doing it. But that got curtailed when we started saying we're going to play by the same rules. For example, the idea they don't abide by the international rules related to subsidizing products by the government funding. So guess what? They're not going to be able to export their electric vehicles to the United States without a significant tariff. Others are doing the same thing around the world. But it is a concern. It is a concern that you have both China, North Korea, Russia, Iran, countries that are not necessarily coordinated in the past, looking to figure out how they can have impact.
Interrupt that impact?
Yes, I do, but I'm not prepared to talk about the detail of it in public. And I think you'll see that some of our European friends are going to be curtailing their investment in Russia. In China, as long as China continues to have this indirect help to Russia in terms of being able to help their economy as well as help them in, as a consequence of that, their ability to fight in Ukraine. The other thing that we talked a lot about is that, and I raised it, and I didn't hear any. I can't swear that everyone agreed because not everyone got to talk about it. But we need a new industrial policy in the West. For example, we talked about how both the EU as well as NATO has to be able to begin to build their own munition capacity, has to be able to generate their own capacity to provide for weapons and the ability to. It came as a surprise to some of us how we had fallen behind in the West in terms of the ability to construct new material, new weaponry, new everything from vehicles to weapon systems. And so one of the things that came out of this was we're going to be meeting again with a number of my colleagues, my European colleagues, is what do we do to increase the capacity of the West, particularly in Europe and Japan, to be able to generate the kind of ability to produce their own weapon systems. Not just for themselves, but to be able to generate that. It's the same, it's what Russia's trying to figure out. That they went to China and they didn't get the weapons, but then they went to North Korea. But we're going to be in a position where the West is going to become the industrial base for it to be able to build the ability to have all the defensive weapons that we need. That was a discussion as well.
President, I'm not sure you answered on whether you would be ready to go deal with Putin and Xi 2 or 3 years from now.
I'm ready to deal with them now and 3 years from now. Look, like I said, I'm dealing with Xi right now and direct contact with him. I have no good reason to talk to Putin right now. There's not much that he is prepared to do in terms of accommodating any change in his behavior. And but there isn't any world leader I'm not prepared to deal with. But I understand the generic point is Putin ready to talk? I'm not ready to talk to Putin unless Putin's ready to change his behavior. And the idea, look, Putin's got a problem. First of all, in this war that he is supposedly have won, and by the way, I think, don't hold me to the exact number, but I think that Russia had 17.3% of Ukraine that they've conquered. Now it's 17.4. I mean, in terms of percentage of territory. They've not been very successful. They've caused horrible damage, loss of life. But they've also lost over 350,000 troops, military, killed or wounded. They have over 1 million people, particularly young people with technical capability, leaving Russia because they see no future there. They've got a problem. But what they do have control of is they are very good at controlling and running the public outcry that relates to how they use mechanisms to communicate with people. They lie like hell to the constituencies. They lie like hell about what's going on. And so the idea that we're going to be able to fundamentally change Russia in the near term is not likely. But one thing for certain, if we allow Russia to succeed in Ukraine, they're not stopping in Ukraine. I recommend, I know you know this because you've written about it, read Putin's speech after they moved in, what it was all about in Kyiv. It wasn't about just, anyway, read what his objective is. And anyway, but so I think that I'm prepared to talk to any leader who wants to talk, including if Putin called me and wanted to talk. Last time I talked to Putin was trying to get him to work on an arms control agreement related to nuclear weapons in space. That didn't go very far. So my point is, I'm prepared to talk to anybody, but I don't see any inclination. There is an inclination on the part of the Chinese to keep in contact with me, because they're not sure where this all goes. And look what's happened in Asia. We have strengthened the Asian Pacific area more than anybody else has. We just put together today I brought on, I asked our NATO allies that we bring on the group from the South Pacific, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Australia. I already mentioned Australia. And I met twice now, I think, with the 14 leaders of the Pacific Island nations. And we've slowed down what's going on there. We've slowed down China's reach. But there's a lot of work to do. This is a moving target, and I don't take it lightly. Sam from NPR.
Thank you, Mr. President. Asma Khalid with NPR. I have two questions. Earlier, you spoke about the ceasefire plan between Israel and Hamas. We're now looking at 10 months of war, and I'm curious if there's anything that you feel personally you wish you would have done differently over the course of the war. And then secondly, if I may, I wanted to ask you about your presidential campaign. I remember covering your campaign in 2020, and there was a moment where you referred to yourself as a, quote, bridge candidacy, a transition to a younger generation of leaders. I want to understand what changed.
Two things. Let's go back to when you talked about would I have changed anything that's happening with Israel and the Palestinians and the Palestinian movement. The answer is, as you recall, from the very beginning, I went to Israel, but I also got immediate contact with al-Sisi in Egypt. I met with the King of Jordan. I met with most of the Arab leaders to try to get a consensus going as to what had to be done to deal with getting more aid and food and medicine into the Gaza Strip. And